Hi, it's Corinne from My Chemical Free House. I'm going to be talking about short-term vacation rentals and people with environmental sensitivities, how to make those work, how to find the best ones for you, how to not get a bad review, and those types of issues that we all have to face. These sites can be really tricky. I do use them a lot myself. I probably spent about a year, not all back to back, but I've probably spent a year in these short-term vacation rentals using these sites. I really like Airbnb. I'm going to put my discount code below because I really like it and I use it all the time. I found some ways to make it work really well for me, and it's just, I believe it's the biggest site, so it's got the most listings, and that's their kind of one-stop, but I'm certainly talking about all of them in this video, and I'm not against any of the other ones at all. It's just that and sometimes you might want to check multiple sites because there's more options, right? So if you have the time, especially you're really in a small town and you need to look at more options, some of them may even have longer term rentals, and some of them are shorter term, or there just may be different options that you might want to check out. All right, so the topics are going to be how to search for places that might be appropriate, might be more appropriate for chemical sensitivities and mold sensitivities, how to ask questions up to the host before you get there, before you book, to find out if it's good for you, what to do if you get there and it's not good, moldy or too many chemicals for you, and then if things still are we're not resolved at that stage, how to avoid a bad review, because on some of the sites there's a number of reviews that you get, and then you're kicked off the site, possibly forever. I don't know if you can get back, but you could lose access to the site for bad reviews. And it's not hard to get bad reviews. I think I've had 3 or 4, so I'm going to talk about that. One of them I did get deleted because I considered it discriminatory, and the site company agreed. And some of them were more subtle, and they might not really count as technically as a bad review. But that's a worry for me. Many of us are dependent on these sites, and sometimes people are living full time who have environmental sensitivities, or it might be their only option when they travel. If they have to travel for health, or any reason, work, family, this could be their main option. Some people don't do well in hotels. Some people find hotels to be better. But this is really important. These sites are really important for people with sensitivities. Okay, so let's start. Searching, I do find that you have to search within Google. So I would go to Google and I would put Airbnb, Scent Free, Vancouver. You have to put the city, the town in Google, and if they have that in their listing, Scent Free, then it'll pull up. You can use synonyms: fragrance free, maybe eco, green, maybe LEED sometimes, LEED, the LEED buildings. That can be listed, number. You could search, you're not going to pull up that many listings on each one. It's not that common for there to be many scent-free listings, so try a few. For choosing places for people with mold sensitivities, which I'm now primarily mold sensitive, and I did have extreme MCS before, and I still do have MCS, but for primarily mold sensitive, I'm looking for brand new. I might search that way, brand new. I'm not going to pull up many listings that way. Not many are listed as brand new, but some are. Some say brand new in the title or in the description, and that can be helpful. I tend to usually just scroll through them all and look at how they look, and if they look really new, I can tell from the types, especially from the kitchen. I can tell especially from the kitchen how new the place is, and if it's a reno, if I suspect it's a reno, I'll ask. But I tend to find good results that way, and it takes a really long time, but just keep in mind, I've talked about, I think in one of the other tours, that renovated can be listed as brand new, whether it's a renovation, whether it's a total gut job, or whether it's a heritage building that was redone, and there's various levels of how, there's various levels of how much could have been stripped out to be redone, and whether I avoid those or not, I did talk about it in another tour. But just to reiterate that a renovated building can be listed as brand new. So you may want to ask the age of the building or find out more. So that can be hard to tell sometimes. This is one of my instances where I had a really bad experience. But okay, so what to ask the host? The general rule here from me, having all this experience, from others who live full-time in vacation rentals and hotels, is to ask as little as possible, to be really nice, kind, and say something nice about the place, and maybe even just a really short introduction on who you are, just so that they know you're kind of a nice person, and then keep it really short. So in the past, I would say when I was highly MCS, I would ask them which kind of cleaning products they used. I would keep it really short. I'd say, oh, I'm just wondering what kind of cleaning products you use, like for the laundry, etc. And do you use any Febreze plugins or dryer sheets? And then they would tell me the products they used, and depending on how sensitive you are, you could ask, like, is it possible to use scent-free detergent before I come, or whatever kind of accommodations. You need to know, because that whatever you agree on, you're kind of taking that risk upon yourself, because they can't make it perfect. They can't guarantee that's perfect. And one of the reasons why you have to be ask as little as possible is because they have turned down some of these sites. Some of the hosts on these sites have turned down people I know for asking a lot of questions, because they're going to think that their place probably isn't good enough. Maybe it's not scent-free enough. Maybe they're worried about that. Maybe they don't want to deal with the hassle. Maybe they know that it's moldy and they don't want to say. Those are all true. Those all have been true, and they have all happened. So I try and err on the side of caution, because I don't want to get turned down for something that actually was good for me, just because they're thinking, uh-oh, is this going to be too much trouble? So I ask as little as I need. For asking about the age, I often do ask about the age unless it's really obvious in the ad. In some cities, it's actually really obvious. In many cities, it's really obvious what building that is. Often buildings have a name, not just the address, but a name, and then you can look that up on Google. So instead of asking too many questions, see if you can look up the building. And sometimes I've asked, oh, what name is it? Like, what's the name of the building? Is this the Florence building, or whatever the name is? And then they'll tell me the name of it, because I think they're not supposed to give out the address before you book on most of them, if I'm remembering correctly. So you're not trying to dig for the address, but you're trying to find out the age. And if you know the name, you Google that, you can usually find out the age. So this does vary from country to country, the norms about asking, and it also very much depends on how high demand this is. So really high demand, really high season, they may have the choice to just pass you off, which I've seen. Low season or just a low demand area, and especially where people are very dependent on this as their living, can be very accommodating. I've seen very accommodating with answering your questions, with changing products. So this really depends. In terms of asking about mold, I don't ask about mold anymore, but I may ask if there was a recent hurricane or storm. I actually try and go with the building that was built after, because I don't even want to risk that. But if there was a storm or a hurricane, I still have to go there. I would ask about hurricane damage, and that's a reasonable question to ask, and they'll likely give you a pretty clear answer on what was damaged. I did find that in Cuba, for example, it is acceptable to ask if there is the olor de humedad, and that's how, excuse my Spanish, my parents failed to teach me Spanish properly, but that's an acceptable question. That means, literally it means the smell of humidity, but that's how they call our musty smelling house, which is many, many houses in Cuba. So that's not rude. If you could say, I'm sensitive to the olor de humedad, then yes. Sorry. So Then that's not an awkward question to ask, but and you do have to also be careful with the any cultural barriers, any language barriers. I can't actually write in Spanish despite not being able to speak it very well with a proper accent. But there were cultural barriers even where my family is, which is Spain. It was a very odd question to ask the age of the building. It was like an impossible question sometimes. So I had people just not respond, and I would say, could you find out more? Or they would say, I don't know the age of the building, when it was actually built, and could you find out more? And I wouldn't hear anything back. So they didn't want to deal with it. It was high season, and it also seemed a strange question there. And I've heard from others who are traveling in Spain that there's the not clear distinction between, and because there's in Europe where there are many very, very old buildings, there may not be this distinction between renovations and actually new. So that's you have to really consider where you are in the world, because the culture could really affect this. And then also whether it's high season or not. Okay, so that's what to ask them. And then what happens when you walk in and it does have the olor de humedad? Or it does have scents or that's too much for you to handle? So I would say I've become more and more cautious here with the different short-term rental sites. I'm talking about them just more generally. I'm not picking any one to tear apart or anything, but I've become more cautious because I have found that a couple things. There's not too much you can do unless, let's say, you asked about plugins. They said there's never been plugins. We don't have plugins, and then there's a plugin because maybe the person who does the emails doesn't actually know that much about the place because they don't often live in the same place. It's someone can be managing this from afar. So then you could have that record in your chat. You could take a picture, or if there was visible mold, you could take a picture if there was some visible damage or something that they said there was there and wasn't. It has to be quite clear. In this case, if you're going to be filing a formal complaint or asking your money back from the host, what I've found, my experience is that there has to be really clear that there was a discrepancy between either the ad and the place, or what they said and the actual place. So if you're just really sensitive, for me, 90 to 99% of buildings are moldy. I'm not going to walk into everyone and ask for my money back. So I'm really cautious. So again, unless there's something really obvious that doesn't correspond with what they said or the ad, then I tend to just say, I'm not feeling very well. Can I put a request in for a change of dates, or put the request in at the same time? Put the request in for the same change of dates, which would be sort of like an early cancellation. And depending on how long you booked it for, this could vary, and depending on, again, the culture there and the chances that they think that they could rent it out to someone else, or just many different factors, right? They may accept your change of dates and they may refund you, or they may accept your change of dates but not refund you unless they rent it out to someone else. So there's different scenarios that could happen. And again, my experience is that putting a formal complaint is only going to work when there's something obvious, and especially that you can show in pictures. So let's say they said there was an elevator and the elevator wasn't working and you're disabled. So you could take a picture of the sign on the elevator that says out of order. You're going to need pictures here. So okay, so the reason why I don't say anything, other than now that I used to, I've tried many times, saying that I was reacting to mold or something, that didn't work out very well for me. So what I found was some people they were unhappy about the change of booking, of course. That's not good for their business. And they're expecting, I don't know what that noise was, they're expecting a bad review. So if I said, it's moldy, I'm not feeling well, could I change the dates? So they're upset about the change of dates, and they might be upset that you said it was moldy, and they're expecting you to write that in the reviews, maybe. And so in those cases, I've gotten preemptive bad reviews. And again, sometimes in some cases 3 bad reviews get kicked off. But what's considered a bad review? I'm not totally clear. I don't totally understand all the policies. You would have to check with each site. Because just something vague is not the same as something that's clearly, there's a star rating and there's what they write. But you don't want them to write anything bad, not just because you could get kicked off after a few bad ones, but other hosts are going to see that when you put in a request for booking, right? So you don't. There's a number of reasons you don't want a number of bad reviews there. So this is what I found. If they know, if I said it's moldy and I'm having a reaction, and could I leave? Could I change the dates? Could I cancel early? They've gone on preemptive attacks by writing something on a bad review on me, and on something that isn't even really. They'll just say I'm difficult. They can say whatever they want. That has been a problem for me, and I've gotten a few different ones. Like I said, I've just had someone say, just kind of allude to the fact that I didn't understand checkout time, even though I certainly did. You should definitely respond if it's one of those sites where you can respond to the review. Just say something really kind, and they don't get to respond again. So you've got the last word. So I didn't even see that one. I was on the road. I was traveling so much I didn't see it. But when he said, be mindful of checkout time, I could have just said something really nice like, oh, actually, I did leave right away. I'm not sure what happened there with the misunderstanding. Sorry about that. Or, just tell the truth and be really nice and don't say anything mean back. And that will look really good when other hosts see that. And that's not unusual to have 1 or 2 things like that on your reviews, so don't worry too much. But other ones were one that said I was a really big problem, and that's because it was actually more of a hotel type residence, and I did complain about mold and asked to change rooms. They changed the rooms. They seemed really nice at the time. I would think I was gracious in how I responded to that review. I didn't find it fair because for me, I had to change rooms based on my disability. It was a very new place. It shouldn't have been moldy, and it did have some visible mold. So I felt that I had enough reason there. But that review still stands. It was written in Spanish, and the best thing to do would have actually been to have written my reply in Spanish because fewer people would have read that. But I wrote it in English. I also received one that was really horrible in my opinion. Really took a dig. And another one where I said, I'm smelling mold, can I change the dates? And this was high season. I figured she could re-rent it very easily, very quickly. Very high demand place and very high demand type of building. She did agree to it. And then she was someone that was just a little bit off. She wrote me something really terrible, and luckily I was able to have that one taken down. But it did take 2 really strong worded phone calls, a lot of energy to make those phone calls to the company that runs the website, and explain to them why it was discrimination. She talked about my mobility issues. That's probably what got it taken down. Is that she talked about my mobility issues, and that to most people is more clear of a disability, although really the issue had to do around mold, and that's why I was leaving. But again, so now knowing all these things that have happened, that's why I generally just take the hit myself, or I don't say anything. And if they say, yeah, you can cancel, but we can't give you your money back, or only give you your money back if someone else books. At this point, I just say, okay, unless there was something, again, totally misrepresented. And in my view, it's a misrepresentation to say brand new when it's renovated, but that's not necessarily the view of the companies or others. So keep that in mind too. Ask the questions that are essential to ask, so that you don't get into these predicaments and you don't get bad reviews based just on the fact that you have a disability where you're sensitive and you had to leave because of it. You don't want to get a bad review based on that. If you get a bad review, you better have had a really good party or left a huge mess or done something actually properly bad. Okay, so I think I've covered what I wanted to cover. I guess the last thing would be, I also don't write too many bad reviews of others, again, unless something was misrepresented, because it's not helpful to anyone. For those of us who are sensitive to almost all buildings, it's not helpful if you just see me write, and you not knowing who I am, probably when you're reading the reviews, that it was moldy. I don't think that's really a fair thing to say unless there was something horribly wrong. There's like a ceiling caving in, or there's a serious mold on the wall, or there's visible mold. I'd be really cautious. I don't think that's really helpful to many people. The vast majority of buildings all over the world are moldy, have some mold in them, usually hidden. But what I do write is anything inaccurate, and I do sometimes say I'm a sensitive person who did well. I'm environmentally sensitive and I did well here, because that could be really helpful to someone else sensitive reading it. So that could be a helpful review. That's maybe the only time that I'll bring up something like that. The first reason to not really write bad reviews of the hosts unnecessarily is that it's not that helpful to say that every building was moldy or every building was scented. We know that every building almost every building has some mold, and almost every building has some scent. And you can talk about things that are inaccurate, but the second reason is, in some platforms, the hosts could actually see this. So they could go to places you've recently stayed at and gone back and checked this would have to be if you were constantly traveling, because you'd have a lot of new reviews, recent reviews. This is possible. And if they see that the last 5 people you've written something bad about, that doesn't look good on you at all. So, again, it's really not helpful to most people to say something like that unless there was something promised that wasn't delivered. So, but I think that covers some of the difficulties. I suppose the last thing along the same lines as them looking up, there are some sites that do a little bit longer term rentals. I have seen somebody Google me, and this wasn't Airbnb. This was a longer term rental site. And they did Google my name, which I suppose could happen in any of the platforms. You have your full name there. You often say what your job is. It's very easy to Google my name, building biologist, and come up with my YouTube channel and my website. And I have had someone turn me down explicitly based on my YouTube channel. It's so popular, I know. My small little YouTube channel currently, because he saw that I was sensitive and blah, 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 blah. So, in this building that I thought I would do well in, I had, and I was going to go see it first too. Like, it was one where you could see it first, so it wasn't a big gamble. I can certainly make that call. I think people with disabilities should be allowed to make that call for themselves. Again, I do understand why for hosts or landlords or owners, they are wary of people that could have a lot of issues, could have a lot of problems, could be making a lot of demands, could try and break the lease early, could break the, if it's not a lease, just the agreement early. I totally understand, and yet I want to advocate for people with disabilities, because if someone was in a wheelchair, you wouldn't say, "Oh, it's gonna be difficult. Am I gonna have to amend something in the bathroom, or could they hurt themselves here?" And they're just getting all worried about what could happen, and that really should be up to the person with the disability to decide, right? Okay, so that could be a bit of a rant, but hopefully those are some tangible tips there for people traveling around the world using short-term rental sites for the locations effect when you have sensitivities, or just for travel in general. Whenever you have to go somewhere, you should, that's about short-term rentals. You definitely should consider hotels as an option alongside that, because the hotels are better for many people. And I understand why hotels are worse for some people, and you try and choose. There are some bnbs that are catering towards very, very chemically sensitive, scent sensitive, and chemical sensitive people. So there's reasons to use both. There's reasons we need both as options for us. And there's differences between how you book them. With a hotel, again, I'm not going to go on about it, but with a hotel, you can really just ask. They're not going to say you can't stay here based on the number of questions you ask. You can even change rooms. Maybe one room is a little musty. I've even seen a room where someone was had clearly been smoking, even though smoking hasn't been allowed in hotels in many places for a long, long time. So I don't know what happened there, but you could change rooms. You can even tell them you have a feeling while you have to leave. They're not going to tell you that you can't come back again. You don't get a bad review. There are some chains where if you've made a number of complaints, they do track them, but like the Hiltons, I've heard. But in many hotels, you can even say you're not feeling well, you're going to have to leave and cancel the rest of your days, and often get your money back. If there's a number of days left in a major chain hotel. So there's some really big differences here. I'm not necessarily doing a whole review on hotels versus short-term rental, private housing, but some of these issues that I went over with the short-term rentals can be quite different in hotels. And so I think that's relevant if you have the option to consider both. All right, that's my video. Trying to keep it under 30 minutes. All right, bye for now. I will link to, I'm going to post the link for the discount code for Airbnb. And you can check out some of the other videos that are a little bit of tours. One was a hotel, and some others were the types of apartments you might find on the short-term rental sites. So those could be interesting. But this one was more about kind of the logistics of using these sites for people with disabilities. Okay, thanks.